Is it really already 3 weeks ago, or only 3 weeks ago, that we had another Trino community broadcast? It is, and this time it is episode 39, and Brian and myself are joined by two awesome Trino users, Edward and Steve. Thank you for joining us here from Raft. It's going to be super interesting to see how you use Trino in what I consider pretty tricky edge cases, or also very common, like this is what Trino can actually do. So it should be very cool to talk about that with you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, so I'm actually super excited about this. A couple of you all know that I have like a Marine Corps military background, and I actually did a lot of work on networks and a little bit with databases and things like that. It's actually what got me into Trino and all this other big data stuff. And so I always find that when my time back in the military, it was very difficult to get anything like checked off, approved. And so I always know that the contractors that I worked with also had a huge uphill battle when it came to like getting any proprietary software approved. And so today I'm actually really excited to figure out what's the process that you all at Raft have to go through to actually get the military and Department of Defense to sign off on an open source project. So I'm really excited. Let's start off with a couple introductions here. Edward, would you want to give a little background on yourself and what you kind of do at Raft?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for inviting us on. Really excited to talk about Data Fabric and Raft. So yeah, I'm one of the tech leads on our Data Fabric project at Raft. Heavily use Trino, heavily use open source technology. We really try to go open source by default and make those contributions to the community.
Yeah, I want to dive more into that too in a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, we'll go a little bit more into it, I guess, as the conversation goes on. But just a brief snippet. We're federating access to data silos. So there's big data everywhere. How do you get it, and how do you query over it? So a lot of natural ties with Trino.
Plenty of that too in the government, right? So,
gosh, yeah, for sure.
I just know that from experience, but I'm sure you all have seen the gambit of how much there is out there in terms of like everybody building their own little castles across different departments and different even reporting structures. It's crazy. So Steve, I've heard you have more of a background than even before that predates Raft with Trino. Could you talk a little bit about that, and what are you doing at Raft now?
Yeah, sure. So I came to Raft from Lockheed Martin, and a lot of the work I was doing there was around their data lake environment.
Oh, cool.
And I was working use cases with what we were calling the industrial Internet of Things. So it's extra I there. And also doing use cases with our HR team. They'd amassed a lot of data. And then I had some experience too, like from the operations side with like F-35 and Orion. So I touched a lot of projects there, and it was all like with the intent of putting all of the data in a place where people could explore and use it. So I won't go too much more on that, but yeah, at Raft, I am the chief data engineer. And so I am actually on contract at a software factory, and I have some exposure into some of our other projects, but I'm long-term looking to continue to grow our data practice at Raft and what we do as data engineers.
And did you bring, I don't know what it was at the time when you came to Raft, but were you the one that kind of evangelized Presto and Trino in the Raft culture, or was that somebody else?
That was somebody else. I'm not sure who to give credit for. It was probably either Barat or Barak.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
So that is actually why they kind of Barat sought me out, is because I had experience with Trino, and Neil actually met Barat at some conference and said, "Oh, you should talk to this guy." And then it was like, "So are we going to be partners, or are you looking to hire?" And he said, "Let's look at hire."
Yeah, that's awesome.
Here I am.
Nice, cool. Well, without further ado, Manfred, why don't we hop into the releases? Let me quickly share my screen. Give me 1 second here. Hold on. Google is being a little awkward. Okay, so Manfred, we're talking. We didn't really get the full stream of multiple releases that we usually do because we only had 3 weeks. But what happened in the last couple of weeks?
Well, we ended up releasing only 2 releases, 392 and then 393 actually just yesterday. The week before we had a bit of a hiccup with travels and a release blocker and other things. So we ended up tossing the idea to release last week. So we only have 2 releases, but that doesn't mean that there's less to be talking about. Like, on the contrary, I think there's some really amazing features that hit it, and so that's always good to see.
We'll definitely need to talk about the game changer that came around in 393, but yeah, let's start with 392.
Which game changer are you talking about?
I mean, I know a lot of them are coming out of game changers, but I'm talking about this first little bullet point here. I'm really excited about.
Yeah, let's just dive into it.
Okay, dive into that one first, because that's the one I think that everybody's excited about and buzzing about today.
So I mean, the ANSI SQL support for Trino is pretty amazing, right? And we have things where, like, we ended up over the years getting like insert, obviously very soon, but then we got update, delete. And one of the last holdouts to some degree of the major keywords was merge, and merge is now supported. So that's pretty amazing. As usual in Trino, right? Like the engine has to support it. That's completely done now. And then the relevant connectors also have to support it. And all our, what I call them, object storage or Lakehouse connectors do support it now. So
we actually have 5, right? There's Hive, Delta, and Iceberg, and then there were 2 more, and I can't remember.
Yeah, I think Kudu or something weird came in. I'm like, I didn't really understand the logic how Kudu came in, but well, whatever. Like, the community must be interested in that. I honestly don't know. It always is driven a bit by the community of what they're doing, right? Like, for example, fault-tolerant execution is also one of those things, like our project tardigrade. Those kind of like fault-tolerant execution behaviors of like storing data on the fly, doing your splits and stuff during processing, they need to be managed, and only some connectors support them. But it's the major use cases. Also, like you'll see when you talk to Edward and Steve, a lot of Trino usage is with Lakehouses. And so those connectors are crucial, and they get a lot of improvements. Also, like that's also one thing that I wanted to mention in the last 2 releases. There's a ton that went into Delta Lake, Hive, and Iceberg again, like performance improvements, like dynamic filtering and stuff like that, and a more generic thing. But then also very specific performance improvements. Iceberg got Avro support now, so it's org Parquet and Avro now. I mean, it always supported Avro kind of transparently in the sense that the metadata files in Iceberg are Avro, but that's kind of a different use case, right? But now the actual data files can also be Avro. And I had an also interesting conversation recently. There's also some rumbling about potentially even having another file format in Iceberg that has some advantages.
The Puffin format. The Puffin format.
Yeah, so we'll see what comes out of that. Otherwise, I think from the enhancements you see, there's some security fixes for OAuth refresh tokens that's worth mentioning. If you're using that, then you want to make sure you upgrade to 393. And then, we sprinkled a few improvements like select pushdown for S3 or the JSON and byte data types in Pinot. And then a couple of release fixes, like correctness fixes for the JDBC connectors, but nothing major. But it's definitely worth updating. And also I wanted to quickly point out also, like, this is now our 4th release with Java 17, and everything is going great. So there's been no hiccups, no negative feedback that like is blocking anyone. So Trino seems to be behaving very nicely in Java 17. So the switch over to language feature Java 17 is probably coming in one of the next releases.
I haven't heard anybody specifically mention any performance improvements. I'm curious to know if you've heard anything, Manfred.
No, I haven't heard anything, but I think for some use, like for Starburst Galaxy, for example, it's hard to say because we've been running in Java 17 for months already. Even earlier. So, but like my main concern was that people keep like, whining about, well, I have to upgrade the Java version, stuff like that, but that didn't come up, right? Like, I mean, a lot of users will also probably talk about that with Steve and Edward. they end up running in Kubernetes, and so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Like it's
As
in the
much as it
container,
used to,
whatever
yeah.
the runtime is.
Yeah, we're getting a lot better there. It's no longer gone are the days of tarball and RPM, right?
Well, we still do that too, but yeah.
Well, we have it, but I'm just saying it's like I think if you look at a good majority of the people that were doing the grumbling before now are on Kubernetes. So
yeah, exactly. All right.
Great.
Well, I think that's it from the releases. So I just want to dive into Raft, and before we do that specifically, I also want to say something with regards to the use cases of Raft. I've worked in like various scenarios, and I also have a European background. So the like siloed off deployment use case with no internet connection and stuff is very common. It's not like a military only like sort of like requirement. It's very common that companies say, well, like can't have your data on any US company sort of stuff, infrastructure, and what has to have our own data center, can't talk to the internet because of XYZ, like health, like, you know, any sort of like ISO, health, FDA, whatever requirements. So a lot of these scenarios that we'll talk about with Edward and Stephen, I think apply to a very large range of users, and anyone can benefit from understanding that a bit better. So
Totally.
tell us more.
well, before we get into that, let's. I wanted to quickly say hi to Evan on from LinkedIn. Hey, Evan. I'm going to see if I can not butcher your last name. Guarnacia, I will assume. Hopefully that was right.
You know more Spanish than me, so I'll be quiet here.
I don't. Well, I have broken Spanish, that's for sure. But yeah, I just wanted to say hey to Evan. Thanks for joining the stream. And without further ado, let's go on to the concept of the week. Wait. I don't have it. It's on the wrong spot. It is right.
Brian.
I thought it got switched around since the last time I was on. And so I was like, wait, it's not there. All right. Well, now that I have totally gotten all fuzzled up, let's just hand this off to our guest today, Edward or Steve. Or actually, Steve, I think you're hitting off. Tell us a little bit about Trino and Raft. And actually, you know what? These are more, I think, more for us to have anyways. We don't need to have these up. Tell us a little bit about Trino and Raft, and like I really want to kind of understand, what's the kind of what is Raft? What are you all trying to do, and how do you use Trino? What's kind of the core business initiative there with what Raft's doing?
Sure. So Raft is a digital native firm that is primarily working with the US government. We support currently 10 software factories across the Department of Defense.
What is a software factory?
Sure. So a software factory is it was an idea created by, I believe, Nick Shalane, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, to try to begin to standardize and modernize the way that we do software across the Department of Defense, mainly. Any context can use this concept, but the idea is that the government doesn't really produce a lot of software, or had not been producing a lot of software. So we're going to make software factories because they actually produce something. So let's come up with standard stacks that we could deploy in virtually any location and mature those stacks using DevOps, modern programming and development practices. And those practices can then help us, once we have standard processes, make sure that everything is hardened and that it is continuously deployable, continuously integrated, and that we're actually doing things in a much faster pace. Because the old days of big contractors going in, and this is kind of like the story behind Kessel Run a little bit, that multiple, I think it was actually Lockheed Martin and then Northrop Grumman, both failed to develop an effective air operation. Actually, it's an air battle management system that they're using at the Air Operations Center. And they both had failed. A partnership was formed with Pivotal, and they got MVP capabilities out in like 18 months or something. And it was,
this is the Spring Pivotal, right? The one that's the people behind Spring. Okay.
Yeah, but that was really the start of the software factory movement.
Okay.
And then I think Platform One was what came next. And
Okay.
I heard from a friend at Kessel Run that they were not super excited about it because it was like, well, that was the point of what we were doing. So you're just copying the thing that we're trying to use to standardize. But anyway, I think there is, valid value to in having independent software factories because they all have specific needs that they're trying to meet. There's a few that Raft is involved with, which are focused in like cyber operations. The stack that you might need for cyber operations could be very different from the stack that you would need for supporting air operations. And we're involved with the space camp too, so you can imagine that these software factories and the use cases that they're supporting within the Department of Defense is very data intensive. So that's where it makes sense for Raft to be developing what we're calling a government off the shelf, which is I think an industry accepted term, but not
GOTS.
GOTS. Let's say that all day.
So just to like sort of put this a bit into like my level of understanding, how far does the stack go? Like I think like or like a factory, like it takes care of like, I don't know, like maybe Kubernetes at the bottom, and then a bunch of other infrastructure tooling, some sort of standards for monitoring, standards for programming language, implementation details, and that kind. But how far up the stack does it go? Like, do you have like a standard schema for people management or like a standard UI framework for web browser architect? Like, how far up or down does it go?
I'll give the political answers. I think it varies. What I've seen is, yes, you're going to start from the Kubernetes level. And once you've got that basic platform, and we have platform engineering teams at Raft that do that sort of thing, then you're going to start to deploy your basic services that would come along with that platform. So you're going to need things like monitoring. So let's put Prometheus and Grafana out there. And you're going to need things like the Elk stack for doing, I always forget, the security in logging management, basically put all my logs into a system so that I can query them and figure out if somebody's trying to attack me or something's broken. It'll go even further up. You could have relational types of databases in there as well. You're going to have basic app stacks that can communicate with those. I mean, it can cover, the intent, I should say, is to cover a large, 80% sort of like types of use cases, and give you what you would need to branch out from there to fit more specific types of case. I don't know if Edward, you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I mean, the intent is, you don't want to reinvent the wheel in times in application teams. There's so much rework that you can avoid if you have this common infrastructure stack. It reduces your security vulnerabilities because you know where everybody's starting from. So there are a lot of benefits to it. But yeah, Steve, you did a great
job. And then I guess also like a lot of procedures and like knowledge sharing becomes applicable, right? Like whoever figures out something that's super helpful for logging, well, all the other teams that use the same factory can learn from that, and vice versa.
Yeah, for sure.
Or patching, even like if there's something that you find the vulnerability or something like that, just you patch it across everybody's the same, right? So very interesting. Now, the specific space that you all are working in, at least with this data fabric thing, is this a stack? Data fabric is a stack, that off the shelf stack, or is it like a segment of a stack? Like, how does that?
Yeah. What is the data fabric? It's kind of an interesting concept. Yeah, the data fabric, we're really trying to make its own stack where it has minimal dependencies, because it needs to be able to be deployed on the edge, in the cloud, on a different Kubernetes instance. So we really want it to be able to be variable and really versatile. So it gives you the core, sort of Kubernetes like management tooling. There's logging in there. There's what you would expect, and then we're trying to build on top of that the tooling for analytics, for AI ML at the edge and in the cloud. So it is I think becoming the stack for data operations.
And do you have to go through like because you're not a software factory per se. You're a contractor that is providing like kind of a drop-in stack I guess, for these other software factories to maybe kind of use in multi, because I mean, analytics can cross-cut a lot of these different concerns, right? And so I guess you're kind of trying to be use data fabric as a kind of common component to other data stacks. Is that making sense, or am I totally missing the mark here?
I think our CTO Bharat he coined a term, single pane of glass over different silos of data, over different places where you can get data from. We want to be that common interface between wherever you're actually getting your data sets from. That's a core goal.
And Trino sits in that.
Oh, Trino is natural. I mean, you think SQL, distributed SQL query engine over everything. That fits really nicely with how data fabric, how we think about that. Yeah.
Is that kind of the interface to data fabric, or is like, for not obviously user interface, but I mean, like, is that kind of the single point that you try to like expose to anybody who's using this single pane of glass?
Yeah. Trino, it's interesting too, because Trino has this wide support for any kind of many kinds of like different access to data. I think particularly with the data silos we're working with, they often have their own sort of bespoke layering on top of it. So we're using Trino to access data sets that we're sort of pulling in from these like large data silos. But yeah, as far as what the user sees, you would expect that most data analysts or data scientists are going to know SQL, right? They're going to have some level of familiarity. You can hook up a JDBC connector, use the Trino Python library. It's this really nice suite of access tools.
Yeah. Now I feel like Trino brings on this all of that capability and all of this access, but that's also potentially like a security concern for a lot of, especially when it comes to like, okay, I'm running this in an unclassified cluster now, and so and what happened, like, how do you, set up the standards around making sure that I don't connect to something that's sitting in CIPR land? I'll explain what CIPR is. It's a what is it? Secret IP routing network, right? And so these are basically like the secret networks versus the unclassified networks that you'll be running in these places. And I remember it was very like, even if you are walking into rooms when you're like dealing with secret stuff, you have to like get checked when you're walking out of these rooms to make sure that like you're not taking a CD or any type of like disk that is about to leave the secret room. So like government is very serious about how they separate these things. And I feel like, government people are going to have a concern, and the policymakers are going to have a very deep concern about, well, is Trino going to connect to one of these very sensitive, things on accident or somehow? And how do you convince people that this is still a good idea? How do you talk about the processes that make people feel more comfortable about having all that access? Because it's already a problem in business.
Oh yeah,
it's a much scarier problem, and from the effects in military and government.
That's one of the first questions we get asked. We demo this, and they're like, well, what if you have two users and they have these like fine-grained differences? I think we kind of go about it in two ways. So we want to be that single pane of glass, but when you're thinking about these like large data silos, a lot of them have their own sort of access controls. So we definitely have to respect those. We definitely have to delegate to those, and those dictate what we can even bring in for a particular user. I think on top of that, we're open source, very open source friendly. So we're using tools like the Open Policy Agent to have this sort of policy in code, to where you have this version controlled. Like, here's a clear-cut listing of how we're managing access to different data sets. And I think that does a lot. When you can actually see a listing of like, well, here's the rules, I think that alleviates a lot of concern.
Policy as code, that's become huge in like data mesh. Yeah,
that's big.
So how does that actually work in terms of like Trino in your cases then? Like, what are you using as the like connected catalogs or storages?
Yeah.
And what do you use? Like, what gamut of like choice? Like, I'm guessing you're definitely using some sort of Hive connector here and there, but like, what about like relational databases, or like you mentioned the Elk stack? Are you using Brian's favorite connector as well?
Yeah, I think it's so, and a lot of it's, we're still even ironing out a lot of these access controls. I think our primary sort of ways we're thinking about pulling data in are, data at rest, data, streaming, and then the sort of ad hoc data in maybe like a blob format. So then the sort of tools that are there for that, or the technologies for Kafka is sort of the industry standard for streaming in a lot of cases. Trino is great for that. Obviously, relational databases like Postgres or MySQL or whatever, we can pull that in. And then S3 or Minio for your blob storage, your ad hoc. And Trino interfaces with those all. It gives you, that sort of common entry point. So if we can secure, tie in OPA, tie in, our policy controls to Trino, we don't have to have that myriad of security, vulnerabilities and arrangements like out where the user is. Yeah. You can push those back.
So you're saying Trino actually serves as actually kind of a connect, like kind of one place for where all this can go. And so you focus a lot of your securing efforts and access protocols around Trino, and you don't have to now think through what does that mean percolating down. Like as long as you got it right from the single source of like where people are accessing all this data from, your job actually becomes simpler in that respect.
Yes, yeah. Definitely. Just to add in a little bit too. So it kind of gives us that abstraction, like you're saying, and it's sort of an access control broker in a way that now I'm not required to push down authorization and authentication to the source system, which may be ideal and could have some benefits to it, but that's extremely complicated to do in practice.
Yeah.
All of your systems would have to support even just Kerberos. And like I tried to do that for years, and it's kind of a hopeless bet. Like the maturity of data storage systems just isn't really there yet to be passing around identity between systems like that. You can do it probably fine in like a single app, but to do it in a very complex multiple siloed systems, it's just like you need a different approach to this problem, and Trino gives us an abstraction that makes that possible.
Yeah, so it kind of acts like a firewall, almost like you're sitting inside of like a virtual kind of environment that people cannot, as long as you've secured the like single point of access, right? You're essentially keeping yourself, you're safeguarding yourself from all sorts of other attacks or vulnerabilities that maybe these other systems have, and all you're thinking about now is Trino.
Right.
If the user doesn't know what data they're not getting, then yeah.
So what are you specifically using? You mentioned the open policy agent kind of work. Like how does that sit in Trino?
Yeah. So I think this is possibly also still in flight too. This is something we're still exploring. So we've tied open policy agent in. You can run it in a sort of service mesh sort of pattern where it's sitting alongside each of your apps, and we're using it in Trino based on user roles. We're using like Keycloak as our OIDC sort of tool. Okay, so we tie open policy agent into there. You say your basic user role, your RBAC role based stuff. I think one of the big questions that we're looking at right now is what happens when that changes. Like what happens when your your identity provider is completely different, because the DoD, like any business anywhere, maybe doesn't have a single source of truth for every single identity. So making that swappable and versatile with something like OPA is really nice, because you don't have to control all of your specific fine-grained access in whatever tool you're actually managing it in.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about Iron Bank. How does Data Fabric kind of interface with that, and how does that actually end up getting deployed onto these actual like not software factories? No, it's the or the actual like customers, I guess, or the different departments.
Sure. So like at a software factory, they will use Iron Bank images to
What's Iron Bank?
deploy software. So
Have
Iron
you watched
Bank.
Game of Thrones?
What's that?
Haven't you watched Game of Thrones? No.
Yeah. The Iron Bank. I love it.
I was told that I should.
Yeah.
So Iron Bank is an image repository, just the same way as you would call out to Google's image repo or Docker's image repo. Iron Bank is just another image repo, but there's a more serious hardening process that goes into accepting an image as being available in Iron Bank. So you've got to be able to, make sure you've eliminated all of your CVEs and that the image is basically clean. You got no highs or criticals. There can be exception processes around it. And all this stuff is freely available on the web too, if anybody is additionally.
So Iron Bank is a container registry similar to Harbor or something like that, or?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So if Iron Bank's publicly available, do they actually, where do they get their images from? So we push our images to various essentially have our Helm chart, and we push it onto Artifact Hub and things like that, which get ultimately pulled into the Google and GitHub. Or actually, yeah, no, we're using GitHub's container one. Are they copying images? So if they're, I guess Trino's on there, right? If you're all using it. So Trino gets pulled from let's say the GitHub public repository, and they just do some extra vetting around it, or they run their own build.
There's a submission process. So either a government person could be a sponsor. If you want to get a fast track, you go shake hands with your favorite general and say, we got to get this in. But, for the rest of the world, you can just submit like anybody else would. You give a justification so that it can be triaged, and then there's some kind of paperwork steps that you'll have to follow. But once it's submitted, it just needs to be scanned, and once the scans are clear and you've hit the other check boxes, then it can be accepted in Iron Bank and everybody can pull from it.
Okay. So and new versions go in there kind of regularly, and then they test every single version, I assume?
Yes. Okay. You will continue to be scanned, and the image will need continued maintenance too.
Okay.
If it comes up dirty because you increased your version, somebody's got to clean it up before it's going to be available to the public through Iron Bank on that version.
Okay. Very cool.
I think it also goes the other way. I mean, I don't know, for Iron Bank specifically, but often the security vulnerabilities also go the other way, right? Your image is accepted, and then a new vulnerability is detected, and suddenly your image is affected, and then you have to have some sort of deprecation process or removal process and stuff like that. So are you managing Trino to get into Iron Bank, or who is doing that?
I believe that Booz Allen took that on and is doing the noble work for us at this point. Last I knew, I did push for it personally, but I found out that they were a little bit ahead of us. So glad that they're doing that.
Well, thanks to Booz Allen.
It'd be very interesting to get feedback in terms of if there's any blockers found, and so we
especially
know those and then adjust our images, right?
Yeah. We should talk a little bit after this.
On the images, we, for example, we had a lot of changes over, for other people in the Trino ecosystem. We changed to Java 17. Before that, we had the base image was sent to us as a base container. Then we changed to the Superlight image from Red Hat. I forgot what it's called now.
I forgot it too.
Anyway, they're a smaller base image, but now we changed with with Java 17 upgrade, we changed to the Superlight base image from Azul, because we use the Azul Zulu JDK 17 images, because they are very close and get lots of security patches. So there's there's a migration path that doesn't affect you as a developer. You just get the latest container, but you get a lot of benefits from our work in that aspect. So it'll be good to know if there's anything found. We can bubble that up, and then maybe even talk all the way to Azul or whatever. Right? I don't know what's underneath the hood for them again, so that'd be super good.
Yeah, but I mean, for Data Fabric, it means that's there. It's there, and it makes
Yep.
the process of like certification and approval a lot easier. You don't have to get 4 or 5 different connector containers, done. If you build them yourself, you'd have to upload those all.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, so you have multiple of these kind of going out now. You get these kind of deployed through traditionally through Kubernetes. There seems to be like Kubernetes is the process as well in the government that's been accepted, right? I think nobody's pushed back on anything like that. That's kind of accepted now.
Yeah, like pretty much every request for information that I've seen lately, it's explicitly citing using cloud native computing foundation principles. So that basically states Kubernetes, we're not going to vendor lock into a specific cloud provider.
But then you said you have a relationship with Pivotal, so you're often using the Pivotal container service or whatever it's called.
Yes, it's not the most popular choice, and I don't think it's going to be the long-term solution, but Pivotal has been used in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's as long as it's a container Kubernetes version that's relatively new. I think there's nothing wrong with that versus all the others. But like every one of those container platforms has their wrinkles, I'm pretty sure.
Definitely.
So from the end user perspective and kind of what they end up gaining from this, like, can you walk us through like, what kind of problems like, are you solving when you do put data fabric there from the kind of, people that are typically the kind of target users? Are they data scientists or what, or are they generals, or who are the people that are kind of using these systems, and what's their experience like with data fabric?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think typically when we think about data fabric, the end user is somebody who is, looking at data sets, looking for data somewhere, because, DoD, like anywhere else, has all of these, data silos, data lakes, where it's very bespoke to access any of them. So getting a single pane of glass across that naturally helps. If you can have somebody who's not super, heavy software oriented, able to pull a data set in and then execute a SQL command, or generate a chart or something, that's the win. That's one of the things we're really going for with data.
Cool.
Yeah.
And is there anything out there even close to this, like that in military right now that they've been able to try? Like, is there like Spark doing data warehousing type stuff where they're trying to centralize it at least, but then they just are probably having some troubles there with the traditional data warehousing woes? Or
the universal data library is one like specific example. I'm not sure what the technology is underlying that, but isn't Edward, please correct me if this is not right.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that is an Air Force data lake, basically. And that is an environment which we have connected the data fabric to.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's kind of the problem where it's like that XKCD, where it's like, you have 14 standards, you try and make a 15th, and now you have So we're trying to get around that. We're not going to be another data lake. We're going to be a way to get data from those lakes.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I personally felt more drawn to Trino for, even in just like, outside of military stuff, you have the same issues, right? And it's not something that's creating a new thing. It's kind of replacing some older kind of ways of doing previous engines like Hive and Iceberg, but then it's kind of unifying then everybody else who's come before, and use cases that those particular systems have solved well. And it's not trying to necessarily, it is doing something novel in that it's unifying them in a way that it has not done so before, where you don't have to move any of that data, like doing the whole data warehousing approach or even data lake approach. If you don't want to, you can just keep things where they are, and that, I think, is the very strong point of Trino. And I'm sure that probably is for the security reasons alone that we just cited, but then just the simplicity and making that all that data accessible. Now, how about dealing with different? So you have these different layers of security, right? And unclassified, you probably have to deploy a Trino in each, right? Is that true, or is there a Trino that can be deployed in let's say a secret zone that has access? Oh, I guess you can go the other way. Sorry, a Trino in an unclassified zone that can reach into secret zone, and I'm guessing you can't do that, right? You have to have different data fabrics deployed in different securities, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a reason why we want to be so flexible, because just by the very nature of how these things work, we're going to have to be everywhere. We're going to have to be in the environments where the data sets are,
Yeah. So I guess as you get more classified, Trino can access actually going towards the unclassified. So if you're in like SCI and you're pointing back to like secret and unclassified, you should be able to pretty much see the whole world and kind of merge those data sets together. It's just as you,
exactly.
Yeah, that's essentially the total superset of everything that you could see at that point. But it's I wonder what you're able to find at that level too when you're able to join all of that.
You'd have to get that super access first, right?
Yeah, gotta go to Mar-a-Lago. That's where
I was waiting for
everything.
All right, so on the higher level then, so you have Trino in place, connected to that storage. What happens next? Like, you have that standardized SQL access to the supported data sources. How do you then facilitate that? Like, what's the typical, like, do people use Jupyter notebooks or like hook up with, I don't know, DBeaver, or like what happens on top of that for dashboarding? Like, do you use Apache Superset, or tell me what the sort of scenarios you have in that stacks there.
Yeah. I think, again, we've got to be as flexible as possible. So with the sort of data fabric stack that we have, we want the ability for sort of the exploratory data analysis, like give me a SQL terminal as quickly as possible. Superset is great for that because you get a SQL editor in the browser, you get some visualization tools for making charts or dashboards. And then the second level is, if you're a data scientist, you want Trino, or you want Jupyter. You want to be able to actually pull some data into some data frames. That's another primary access point. And then application level interfacing. So exposing interfaces where you can hook up, a JDBC connection or something to actually go through and get the data programmatically.
Oh, you have actual like custom applications that go in via JDBC into Trino to get the data, but then do some custom rendering or whatever, math analysis or whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely, I don't know if we've got any currently, but that's definitely going to be a primary way to access, especially if you are, thinking data fabric to data fabric, where you've got multiple fabrics that may have, different information in either. That programmatic connection is going to be huge, just to, visualize what's, across the mesh.
Yeah. It's very cool. How do you, are you all kind of rolling your own standard right now when it comes to code as policy? Or is there actually a like agreed upon standard across the Department of Defense for that?
There's definitely no standard.
Yeah. Are you all working on creating something at least for Raft? And then like, because this is a question in data mesh today. Like, this is something that and I'm actually hoping even we at Starburst can start thinking about this kind of question of like, how do we standardize, how do we standardize the code as policy? Because if you can actually essentially get a Kubernetes level agreed upon standard, like how do you, have some policy that is written down in some YAML format or whatever it is, JSON. And that is ultimately what decides how long certain data lives, how long people have access to it, and when that expires, and all this stuff could be very easily encoded and automated and taken away from humans running amok, And I think that just in terms of security and what you all are caring about there, like, I always wondered if that would ever come out of the government, because I feel like that's the most important in government. And so have you all looked and seen anything starting to sprout around in the... I
personally think that Open Policy Agent is the closest thing to there being an accepted standard right now.
Cool.
It's the most mature CNCF kind of native, I think, incubating still project that answers the mail on it. But I don't think it covers all cases though, because it's
a lot.
Yeah. But I think too, there's a role for like the data catalog to play in this, where something like a data hub or similar could be used for developing the policy by like somebody who's more of a data steward, but you can export that in a technical format and then convert it into something that OPA could understand. That's where I sort of see things going, is like there's probably going to be some back-end tool that can handle a lot of it, but you're going to need more front-end tools for people who don't want to write YAML.
Yeah.
That makes it a little bit easier to use.
Yeah.
What, you don't like YAML?
I have no issue writing YAML.
But
I hate YAML. I absolutely hate writing
Data types are a little bit annoying because it's like, what do you mean it's not
indentation?
Yeah, everybody hates indentation. Everybody hates and it's just like, it's so hard to debug if you do have like one small thing wrong. It can just
YAML lint every time.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's lints and stuff like that, but then there's times where the lints even fail you if it's like technically. Yeah. Okay, cool. So, I mean, that definitely gives us a good picture, I think. Like, what have there been time, like, where are you seeing still the challenges that you on the Raft team are facing, like getting adoption or any kind of like pushback to like this type of thing? Like, where are the problem spaces still that you're still trying to solve and like grow out the data fabric to actually adhere to these different problems, as well as like where do you think really Trino doesn't fit in the military or DoD space, and like how's that how's that kind of like maybe making you think like where do we move outside of data fabric as well? Like, are there other solutions that you're also looking into that go outside of this that solve a similar data problem but maybe in a different way? So
I think honestly, going back to like what problems or what challenges do we have, I think a lot of times when we talk about the data fabric, I think people jump to the conclusion that we're just another data lake, or that we are going to sort of latch on to a data lake and just be the front end for that data lake, right? Those are the two, I think, conceptions that are really common. We have to really push against that and say, like, we're not trying to be another data lake, and we're not trying to be one data lake. We're trying to sort of federate access and sort of have a more embedded, like edge-friendly data mesh, where it's not a hub and spoke. It's not data silo in the center and processing at the edge where you pull it down. It's data everywhere, data where you need it, and it's a lot easier to sort of do data analysis on. I mean, I think Trino does. I think the only disadvantage is not even something necessarily that is common to Trino, but it's just that there are so many bespoke ways of showing your data. Is it behind a REST API? Is it behind some weird way of accessing the data that no standardized connector can really access easily? So that, I think, is where we've had to do some additional work there.
So it seems like misconception, and then there's kind of this analysis paralysis of like, what do we even go with? There's now some Cambrian explosion of data solutions that you're like, where do we even begin with this? And we see this for sure on the Trino side. I feel like what you just expressed was like the kind of misconceptions and difficulties that we have just at Trino at baseline. People just see us as like, is it a database or a data lake? Okay, well, it helps with that. We've replaced Hive in a lot of ways, and we've become this really good query engine that does sit on that, but it's so much more. And there was actually a very popular like data CEO, who I will not mention, who even hopped in on like a Hacker News thread that was talking about Trino, and he had the same misconception. So it's like it's even people who are in the data space don't get really what differentiates Trino in that sense, in that it's not just a data lake query engine. It is, but it is also so much more in terms of the federation capabilities, in terms of now the ability to do ETL and all this stuff. So I think that's really, that's on us to try to really get people to understand that better as well. But also very happy that you all are being prolific on the DoD side, trying to get that message out as well. And I think it's a hard one to sell people because limited attention spans and stuff. It's hard to get people to get that. So.
Yeah, just for some practical examples, because you mentioned REST APIs, like and how there's weird ways to access data. I mean, that's essentially one of the core Trino use cases, to be able to connect to whatever and expose it in a tabular format. And like simple use cases are implemented. Like, for example, we have the Google Sheets connector that where every Google sheet in a basically a sort of like a spreadsheet is exposed as a table. But then also more advanced examples that we use successfully in the Trino community efforts, for example, is Jan wrote a HTTP client connector that can connect to whatever REST API as a base framework. And then he also has a GitHub connector. So we pull GitHub stats via the GitHub API, dump it into via that connector, dump it into via create table as statements and insert statements, dump that into a data lake, and then we query it from there, right? So GitHub is sort of used as the source, and it Trino totally understands and can work with these REST APIs. So
query
that anyone can attack, right? So if you have any of that kind of stuff in your scenario, you can also implement a custom connector. And Starburst, for example, has a Salesforce connector that talks to the Salesforce API, right? So those are really good use cases.
Yeah, no, I think the most compelling use case for Trino is for analysts or engineers who don't really know how they want to structure their end data product yet. They know I kind of want some stuff from these various sources. It gives you the freedom, because it's schema on read, to experiment a little bit with how you want to structure your end result, so that you're not trying to engineer something before you know exactly what you're trying to solve for. And I found in the past, when people bought into that, then they started really building traction in this model. Whereas, I've run into a lot of relational zealots. They're well, we can just do it in this way. It's you don't have to, though. There are simpler models that you can work in, and you could still put it there if you want. It'll be okay.
Yeah, especially being able to, run over something that's, let's say, a NoSQL database that is very loose in the beginnings. Essentially you could have a couple, main keys there or something like that. Let's say a Mongo or an Elasticsearch, and you have keys in the core document, and then you have essentially a bag of words, that will just be your unofficial model until further notice. And you can actually do joins with that on the more, kind of established structure part of your schema that you've been slowly developing. And I think it just it makes it so that your upfront modeling doesn't have to be so perfect. You could essentially play around and have a little bit of that curious nature versus having to think about everything all upfront. It's very important to kind of have that flexibility and kind of, versatility.
The work that we're doing with Corsair Ranch, that's another software factory. They're focused on the National Guard, but they're running training flights, and there's a ton of data that's coming off of these training flights every time, because we're observing. I believe there's some sensors to record body critical measures, and we're getting sorting data from the flight itself.
Wow.
Get that onto an edge device, and then we're going to get it into more central processing from there. So we'll forward things off through Kafka, and then we'll get it into somewhere that they could actually use it to present back to the analysts and the officers that are working at Corsair Ranch. So then we can go and kind of fast track all this stuff. So it's all right, we got your data. We can automatically do a little bit of organization with it and some transformation, and we'll push things right over to Superset and running queries off of Trino. And it's you're cooking with peanut oil at that point, because we got data and it sat on the disk for a week, and then we thought about picking it up and we got distracted. So it's it super speeds things up.
Yeah, especially around policy. I know that one thing I always hear people say is getting people into meetings alone is already difficult, but I think fivefold for Department of Defense and government regulation stuff, it adds such a heavier process to it. So if you can actually get something up front, get some agreement and buy into how Trino or particularly Data Fabric works, and you get that buy into that stack, then that just alleviates a lot of the upfront meetings that need to happen, the upfront policy that needs to get accepted for this to happen. It's literally just maybe a much more generalized, oh, we need to add one more thing under the data fabric. Okay, let's have that small little bit, and then boom, it's now into the whole ecosystem of everything that you can query, and you don't have to think about how do we move this, who's in charge of this, and blah blah blah. No, it's just like it takes away a lot of that necessity for meetings and all this other discussion about how do we approach this. No, it's just going to be where it is, and Trino's just going to pull it up.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's huge. Anything else that we've kind of missed in terms of like, what else, what's exciting about Data Fabric and how you're using it with Trino, and maybe even give us some examples of like, you gave us the cool flight examples. I was totally excited about that. Like what else is out there, and what are you guys excited about, moving forward?
Steve, I know you've got a ton of like thoughts in your mind about where we can go with it. I want to hear.
So I am really hoping that we can get into more of like the condition-based maintenance and like real-time operation scenarios. There's not a ton that I'm aware of which is done even for like basic metrics and simulation and exercise. Like there's areas of responsibility, and there's like things like target custody, and even just measuring like how effectively was this tracked in a simulation isn't done right now. And a lot of that is because, at least from what I've seen, the data isn't really used for anything. They're just like, oh yeah, we did it, and we did an exercise, and we're all done. I think that we have a potentially huge play in getting more involved in those types of opportunities, because we've got the tooling that can scale and be deployed anywhere in classified areas, and we can kind of just grow that, and then we can actually like help the DoD become more data driven in what's going on, because like there's lots of pockets, but there's no real consistency, and there's a lot of the way things had been done, and I'm sure you're aware, Brian, but the military tends to be a very conservative organization. So there's the aspiration to be data driven, and then there's like the reality is like there's a ton of work to do, even in like the cultural change side of it, because all it takes is an officer to go, you joined those 2 data sets, that's classified now. It's like, well, you just created 6 months worth of work, so that's not acceptable. Like MO, we've got to do something differently and better.
I think is that also to go with that, like how do you avoid those situations, right, where you're actually joining like what somebody had maybe misclassified or something, and say, oh well, this is not now that, or maybe it's the fact that now that they're together, that actually makes it more interesting information, and individually they may not have been super interesting, but now that you've combined them, some politician or some sort of essentially like general decides that this is now something that needs to be behind closed doors. Like, how do you convince people like that this is actually what's causing a lot of our delays and kind of our misinformation, and people who are making decisions on a lot of these things? And like, is that something that you as Raft take on, like as your executives, like to bring that kind of to hey, this could be so much better, here's how it works in industry, here's how it's working right now in the military, like we see these particular instances where these things happen? Like, is that something you're taking on as a company?
Our executive leadership, like Shubi is a big change agent. She wants to see the DoD function better, and we have other small business types like defense unicorns that are kind of fighting the same good fight to try and get the Department of Defense to kind of look at things a little bit differently and be a little bit more accepting of risk and change, and balancing that against value so that we can really make an impact and do that faster. And like, that's kind of what Raft is all about, is making an impact over like, just having a huge bottom line. Like, we want to do better, by our customers, and do so in innovative ways. So yes, we are going after that. I'm happy to have the soapbox too, to like, on that a bit as well.
To go for it, and also tell it, is Raft hiring?
We are hiring. We're definitely hiring. I think what I know we were over 100. I think we're at 102.
Past 100. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if anybody who's in the Trino community wants to work on a really cool project, do you have to be U.S. citizen and all that stuff, or what's the?
I don't know.
Yeah.
At Lockheed, that was always a requirement. I don't know if Raft has the same requirement.
Okay.
A lot of our employees do have clearances, so that
Okay.
would imply yes.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
That's not for me then.
We can find work for
Go
you.
stay up in Canada.
I'm staying here in Canada anyway. I'm good where I am.
Well, that's really cool. So, I mean, take your soapbox, man. I want to hear about like what are the things you all are doing there, and and how Trino's fitting into that, if you have that, or just what all are you doing?
Yeah. So, getting a little bit scatterbrained on it, but so I think one of the solutions or potential solutions to that, this is classified now, is having the stack that can handle it in various environments. Because if it's as simple as like we just need to get the data over the line sort of thing, then that's a lot easier problem than, well, we only have the tooling and unclass and we need this data for achieving this goal. It's a very simple problem to go, all right, well, we just got to find a way to get it across, and that's not the easiest thing either. We are doing a little bit of work in that regard to try and make it simpler to get data sort of over the line so that it's in a classified environment, or even disconnected network environment. But yeah, having the stack in place and then having a process to make it simpler to move the data over, I think is the best solution that we could come up with at this point. But there's also like the cultural issue that people are just afraid of that scenario happening, but it is actually intractable to try and compute, like if I join these two data sets, then it becomes a higher classification. Like you don't know until some human in an authoritative position says, oh, that is actually really bad information for the wrong person to get a hold of. Yeah. So like there's that part of it, I don't think is very well understood, like just in the world in general, that we can't predict what could be damaging information to someone. So
well, also when you it's funny how you said it's really bad information to have for someone with bad intentions. Well, it's also very good information for someone with good intentions to have. So there's always the flip side of that, right? Like understanding your data better and exposing all the analytics, which is what Trino thrives on, isn't inherently good or bad. It just depends on the actor that then what they do with the data. And that's also something where Trino is very diligent about it. What we very much focus on is that the data is correct. Like the queries run correctly, produce the correct results and stuff like that. And in fact, there was a very funny at the Trino meetup earlier this week, there was a funny incident that Martin and you were talking about, Brian, at Facebook, where queries were running very fast in another system, but they produced the wrong results, right? Like they just tossed away data. So go listen to that once it goes live on the Trino website. That's
it was actually information that was being used by Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. So he was actually using this system and it was giving him wrong data.
It was bad.
Anyways,
we make sure the data is correct that you get from Trino, so you're in good hands.
There you go. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, anything else before we kind of, we'll start wrapping up the concept of the week. Thank you so much for giving us the kind of, peek behind the curtain of what it's like to actually be, dealing with these types of issues. I mean, I've always wondered if Trino is in any of these kind of secret and top clearance environments, and I'm super stoked to think that it's being used there. This is actually kind of a full circle moment for me, to be honest, since I started my whole journey in the military and learning about databases through that, and being really excited from there, and then now seeing that this system that I'm really excited about is helping out military and Department of Defense personnel. It's really exciting stuff because it's super important work that you all are doing at Raft. So anything else you all want to kind of close off on or kind of say before we hop on to the next segment of the show?
I don't have anything else, but
Yeah,
appreciate the offer.
let's get on our soapboxes.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks so much. We'll definitely send me the kind of careers page for Raft. We're gonna send in a couple of Raft kind of links to the bottom of the show notes here, and we'll kind of cue you in on. It's a definitely you would call yourselves a Trino shop, right? If anybody who's in the Trino community wants to work for you, you're looking for people who know Trino, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Probably also a whole bunch of other things on the open source ecosystem. Like
Kubernetes, NCF and Trino and all that good stuff. Yeah, definitely.
So if this is something interesting to you, possibly you might need a security clearance, and but if you know Trino and Kubernetes, and
you're exempt automatically.
Yeah, you're basically just hop right in. And you'll be
go raft.tech is the address. So.
Definitely. All right. Well, without any further ado, let's go to the pull request of the episode.
All right, Brian, show us what got merged and is cool.
Yes. So I wanted to pull up, I should have pulled this up beforehand, but there we go. So this was one of the ones that came in on 392. And I just thought it's a simple, concept. It's easy to talk about. But I wanted to just, shout out to, one of our community members, Prithir. Oh my God, I didn't remember where it actually is split. It's Preeti Ratnam. So thanks, Preeti, for submitting this. This is actually a very good PR in terms of the fact that, like, when you're running selects on JSON files, sometimes those JSON files have quite a bit of fields in them, and so it's better that we would actually not have to, when we're already running on JSON files, it's already slow enough with serialization, deserialization. So what this pull request actually adds is that if you're doing, maybe a select amount of columns, on that JSON file, you're actually going to be pushing that down now to the Hive connector, and it's not basically going to be sending back these large giant JSON files to send across the wire, versus like before you were potentially having quite a bit of these things. So you could currently only do the pushdown, select pushdown for top level JSON files. So if you do have like one column that has a whole bunch of nested fields in it, then we can't clear those out. But that is going to be a future optimization that they're also going to be looking into adding as well. They mentioned in this PR. So anyways, thanks Pratir and Prati, and thanks to Andre for doing the review here. I'm not going to be doing this one in particular in the demo today, but I think it's pretty. I think just explaining it out loud in words hopefully did it justice enough. Anyways, thanks again for both of you. And this is going to be a quick last part of the thing. We're going on to the demo of the episode. All right. So this this month's demo of the episode, I actually got a Great Expectations demo already pulled together that I did for a meetup that I did. So I am also doing a little bit of a cop out for this month's demo because I already wrote this one. And I figured I'll just embed this one in the show notes and just kind of go over what the demo is about. So Great Expectations is a data quality library that is expressed in Python. And it basically allows you to, at different points in your data lake or any kind of like ETL process or data pipelines that you're running, it allows you to basically run validations on your data. So let's say you have multiple phases. You kind of have your data that comes in kind of a landing format. Your first step is usually you have it in some sort of raw format, maybe JSON or CSV, and you need to clean it up, put it into a more queryable format, let's say like the ORC or columnar type formats or Parquet. And then once you have it in that, you want to basically make a consumable table that is going to get used by your kind of data analyst. So you kind of have like 3 phases there. In reality, these end up being probably 5 to 7 phases or maybe even more. just depending on your workload. But simple enough. Think about it as 3. Each time you create a new kind of data set out of this, or make a new step to your pipeline, is a potential that there's going to be some misrepresentation on the schema. Things get updated. You're going to change things, as add columns and things like that. You want to essentially always have a data validation to essentially ensure that you're where you are intending to be. Essentially you didn't add something or remove something unintentionally. And Great Expectations is a data quality tool to kind of check, and I just said adding and deleting columns, but there are so many other things it checks. Kind of validates maybe a batch size that you're running, so it can check how many rows just came out of a particular run, all sorts of things. And so so you express these things in these kind of validations called expectations. And so they have a huge library of expectations. It actually gives me a lot of great insight in terms of how I can actually what expectations or what validations I should be running on my data just by going through there and checking it out. So what this demo is actually going to do is it's going to run you through pulling up some Pokemon data. There's actually 2 Pokemon files. One's a CSV that has kind of the dimensional Pokemon data that is what their hit points are, the type of Pokemon they are, and this kind of thing. And then you'll have another table that's going to be coming from Pokemon Go, the very popular Pokemon Go data set, which has lat longs of the spawn locations of those Pokemon. And so these are 2 tables that you bring in raw, and you're going to be transforming them like I just said. And after you get done transforming them, you essentially want to, at each point, run these Great Expectations validations. And this is just going to be it's a fun little demo, especially for those of you millennials like me that or Gen Zers maybe that are super into Pokemon. Always fun to just play around with nostalgic stuff. So nostalgic data sets. So that's kind of the overview. You can go to this repository I created. It's all contained in there, the data and everything in Trino-Data Lake. And then you just run, it's in a Docker Compose format. You pull that up, and then you just go through the steps that I put in this markdown tutorial, or you can follow the video that I have in the show notes. So without further ado, we'll go on to the last part of this show, which is
before we jump there, though, I want to just quickly ask Steve and Edward if they see any use cases for Great Expectations or tools that in
good question.
Stack. Do you use things like you were talking Python before with Jupyter and Apache? Do you use things like dbt or I think Great Expectations is also Python based, isn't it?
Yep, it is.
I haven't had too much experience with it. Steve, what about you?
I actually did a demo for Raft's Data Guild last month on Great Expectations. I definitely think that there is a use case for it. Data quality is just in general a pretty significant concern as it relates to organizations as they start to roll out their data strategy.
Yep.
And this is a very tangible and simple way to start implementing data quality standards on a data set. I've seen some pretty kludgy solutions, and this is very straightforward.
Yep. Yeah, I really did enjoy the process for sure. And what did you think of Great Expectations, Steve?
It was really straightforward to get started with. I mean, my demo might have been even more superficial than yours. I basically just followed their quick start.
Yeah.
But that went very smoothly.
Yeah, it's a great concept, and it's actually very simple to use. So yeah, we're hoping to ramp up more demos and kind of more community events around it, because people are asking us a lot of this in the Trino community as well. So glad to hear you all using it, and let me know if you have any questions, or you want to. Are you already in touch with the Great Expectations folks, or just still kind of proving it out?
Yeah, just experimenting at this point.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
All right. Well, without any further ado, let's go to the question of the episode. And this is also a very simple one. I don't even know why I'm even showing my screen anymore, because this is a very, very straightforward answer. But I've actually seen this pop up twice now as people have started moving to Kubernetes and trying to kind of understand it. I know there's a huge portion of the data people that I think, maybe they were hopped on a little bit on Docker, but they weren't really up to date on Kubernetes. And so there's still people kind of coming in asking us these questions as we have really more fully featured the Helm chart. And so somebody asks, I'm not able to use Helm anymore at my company or at my company due to some various restrictions. So I guess they can't run the specific like Helm commands that we had showed in previous Trino community broadcasts. So one thing, that's good to know about Helm is that you can actually just generate all of the configuration files just by using this Helm template command. And I actually do that. I think this person only saw the first Trinities episode that I created around Trino on Kubernetes. And so the way that you could do this is essentially locally, you would install Helm on your system, run the Helm template command, and actually you can generate, this could even be an automated part of your process in your CI. And so you can basically just have Helm run that YAML command and then version those docs based on the latest, Helm config that you got from us and the new values that you set in there. And so all you really need to do is know that Helm template command. I have that in the show notes. And essentially, we also have it in the second Trinities episode where we actually generate and go debug and dive into. My favorite thing to do is debug YAML and just look at it. So and make sure that everything looks correct. But Helm is actually a nice way to avoid you from having to futz around with too much YAML yourself. They just generate it, and you just have to really have the correct templates out there. And then once Helm generates those, you could then version those YAML files. And then in terms of your regular system, you don't have to use Helm and have it installed anywhere other than your local system and or maybe a CI setup to kind of maybe any change that you do to the Helm file or the values file. Maybe you want to scale up your default settings for the number of worker nodes or something like that. You can actually version that once you run the Helm template command. So that's pretty much it. So that is really
also to clarify for people that don't even have that opportunity. All Helm really is a templating system to create the Kubernetes resource definitions. Mm-hmm. So if you don't want to use Helm because you like routing or you have another method of creating those Kubernetes resource files, then just go do that.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to use Helm. It's just more convenient and less error prone, arguably.
Well, and I think like the concern was they wanted to follow the standard that we set out in the community, but they didn't want, they weren't allowed, I guess, to set up like have Helm be like the standard way that they version things and run things and things like that. They can't just use a values YAML. But I'm just like, well, as long as you can get clearance to just put it on a CI/CD and then you version the values YAML and you run that, as part of your CI/CD process and just automatically, version that, then it's like you don't have to have Helm be the way that you do that. You can kind of be the step in between. So yeah. Cool. Anything else before we hop off?
Yes. Again, I have to play questionnaire. Steve and Edward, what Helm chart or stuff are you using for your Kubernetes stuff with Trino?
What Helm chart?
Yeah, are you using the?
We're fully using the Trino Helm charts officially.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
What's your experience been so far, actually? Because we are still trying to improve it, but has there anything missing that you've all really needed, or?
Not that I can think of. It's super easy to add new catalogs if you need that. I know we've done that a couple times. I can't think of anything glaring that's been missing from it.
Nice. Scaling up, scaling down is all working. The horizontal. I think we have the horizontal autoscaler that we use. Is that what you all are using, or?
I'd have to actually look and see. I don't know if we've tried to change those yet.
Okay. I think that is
a lot
an
of that
optional
scaling
one.
is done manually or by some external system.
Okay. I wasn't sure where our state was of that. I know we've been incrementing a lot of like new features into the Helm chart now, and so it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, with that, one more thing actually I will say is Trino Summit is going to be coming up in November. It is going to be a hybrid event, and it's going to be November 10th. And so you can now sign up for that. I will put that link in the show notes as well. And definitely come join us if you are, able to. We are still at this point a hybrid event. Planning on doing, at least 250 or so people to be in person is kind of our max stat for the location that we're doing. We're trying to keep people somewhat spaced out still. And otherwise, we will have a virtual component to that if you are not comfortable yet doing traveling and things. And it'll be it's November 10th, and we'll be just doing a whole day of really cool, incredible talks. If you folks here at Raft want to sign up for that, we are doing call for speakers now until September 15th. And then otherwise, if you're just wanting to attend, that you can show up virtually anytime, but there is limited space in terms of in person. So try to jump on that as quickly as you can if you do want to show up live.
Yeah, and in both cases, please register. Also, if anyone is interested to sponsor as well, we always also interested to have sponsors. And when you say in person, it is in the Commonwealth Club west of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. So correct. Beautiful views and come to California.
We'll all be out there. Great. All right. Well, take care and see you all. Happy querying. Music for the show is from the Mega Man 6 gameplay album by Krzysztof Sławikowski. Don't forget to give us a star on the Trino repository at github.com/TrinoDB/Trino. And for more information on future shows and to find show notes, check out trino.io/broadcast.